Okay. Hello. Can everybody that's there please say hello and introduce yourselves in the chat? Let's make sure that the technology is running, please. Good afternoon. If you can see and hear us, please can you say hello in the chat and introduce yourself? That would be great. Thank you. Hello. Hi there. Welcome to another sunny afternoon on the festival main stage. Thank you for joining us. This session is on adapting to modern teaching and learning in the transforming world of higher education. To lead us through the session, I'd like to introduce you to Dónal Palcic from the University of Limerick and to Gary Sheehan from McGrawhill Education. Gary, Dónal, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Barney. Just share my screen. Perfect. Barney, can you just confirm that you can still hear me?
Yes, I can, and I can see the PowerPoint.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. So, yeah, just by way of introduction, my name is Gary Sheehan, and I am a senior academic consultant for McGrawhill Education. I've been working in Ireland now for over 3 years, looked after Scotland for quite some time as well. And now I manage North UK, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. So yeah, I'll hand over to Dónal there to introduce himself.
Hi, yeah, my name is Dónal Palcic. I'm a lecturer in economics in the Kenny Business School in the University of Limerick. And I've been lecturing there for 15 years. And for most of those, I've been teaching introductory economics to our first year undergraduate students, which is a very large class on our main business studies program in the business school. And I also teach economics to our second year cohort as well. And that's also a very large class. Okay, I'll hand back to Gary.
Perfect. So yeah, I am going to start with something I'm very comfortable with, a rant about the modern generation of students. And this is going to be founded from conversations that I've had with hundreds of instructors, conversations that I've had with hundreds of students. And I guess some of it comes from how I was as a mediocre student back in the day as well. But in terms of, you know, the Gen Z cohort and the way things have changed over the last 5 or 6 years, I would say, primarily, you know, the mindset of modern students has changed, and their perception of university has changed drastically, I would say. And Dónal can speak to this in a minute as well. But, you know, these guys have part-time jobs, they've got other preoccupations, they've got Instagram, TikTok accounts that they want to look after, in the off chance that maybe they develop some kind of popularity and make $1 million in a couple of months. And with all that considered, college is very much considered just a part of the life stage at the moment. I remember when I was in college, that was everything that I was doing for 4 years of my life, and anything that happened alongside that was just, you know, a small part. But you know, all of my time and effort was being invested in college, and I think it's probably flipped on its head these days, where students are doing it as a small part of their life, and everything else is taking precedence. In general, they have a reluctance to read these days, and you know, there's a lot of conversation out there around, you know, print versus digital and screens and this and that and the other. But the reality of the situation is, if you're standing in front of a group of undergraduate students these days and you're saying to them, you know, you need to buy this book, this corporate finance textbook at £70, and this is what you need for the course, the thought process from a student perspective is, yeah, but what am I going to find in that book that I'm not going to be able to find in my smartphone with a quick search? And, you know, as well as that, then they're relying heavily on lecturer notes and slides. And I think we all see that in our teaching, particularly with the undergraduate groups, where maybe motivation levels haven't developed fully just yet. So, they feel like, most of what I need is going to be put up on the LMS. It's going to be there and available for me. So I'll go and look at that every now and then and see how I get on. Predominantly, they'll let that activity go until very, very late, coming up to exam time. But this is one of the trends that we're seeing from our conversations, and I'd imagine a lot of you are seeing as well. The danger of later is something that I find very interesting as a concept when I think about this modern generation of students. And we kind of see from the trends in the market that if students haven't bought a book in the first week or second week of a semester, they're generally not going to purchase it any later than that. If they haven't seen the relevance of turning up to lectures, if they don't see the real value of being there for that 45-minute session, chances are they're going to tail off, in week 3, week 4, week 5, where they'll kind of pick and choose where they go in, to the point where after week 6, they might not be coming at all. They might just be thinking that they're going to do their own study at home. Obviously, that danger of later as well happening with assignments and things, where if you give students the option to leave everything until the last minute, they generally will. And these are all just things to be conscious of when engaging with this new generation, which is becoming more and more consumed with smartphones and these new kind of challenges, these new aspects of life that are creeping in the last 5 or 6 years. And one thing I wanted to kind of highlight is the idea of lecture capture. It's not something that I have really an issue with, but I just think about the perception of it from a student perspective, where we have universities here in Ireland where it was introduced last year, and we're going to be recording lectures. They're going to go up on the VLE afterwards. The perception of the students, in my opinion, is going to be, it's going to be online, so I don't need to get out of bed at 9 o'clock to be in the lecture theatre for 10. But because I can just go online, I can go on the VLE and watch the lecture later. But how many students actually go on and watch that lecture, sit down for 45 minutes and go through it? I'd say very, very few. So the outcome from the implementation of that process with a large percentage of modern students is going to be that they lose out twofold. They lose out on the initial face-to-face interaction with the instructor and the actual lecture time, and then they also lose out because they're not motivated heavily enough to go and watch that video in more detail afterwards. And finally, I feel like there has been a shift, probably beyond 5 years, probably in the last 10 years, where the responsibility for learning, the perception of that has changed. So I think students, 10 years ago, were going to college where it was drilled into them, this is your responsibility. You have to study, you have to get your degree, you have to perform. But I think students are entering into first year in college now with the expectation that, there's a service provider at the top of the room and it's their responsibility to get me my 2-1. And I think that is something that is definitely creeping in as something of an issue in terms of HE, because I do know what some of the instructors' perceptions are in terms of, things like spoon feeding, things like applying structure to a process that was generally something that was all the students' responsibility and just supplemented by the instructor pointing them in the right direction. So with that, I'm just going to hand over to Dónal just to kind of give his insights from dealing with a large economics course for the last couple of years.
Yeah, again, I'm not going to say too much around this slide because there's not much I wouldn't disagree with there. I've definitely seen that change in the last 10 years in particular, where there's always a cohort of students, obviously, who are very much engaged, to go to everything, to do all the readings, and then more, the better students in the class. But definitely in the last 10 years, I'd say it's gone from a case where maybe the majority of students were in that bracket where they went to everything, they did the readings, they got the book or whatever, to it's now really the majority of students maybe aren't attending. So I'm talking about obviously pre-COVID times where we had face-to-face, where they just literally would not turn up to lectures. Whatever about part-time jobs, I've met lots of students who have full-time jobs and they're on campus maybe once a week and just relying on, hopping on the VLE, getting their lecture slides and hoping that's enough to get them through the exams. And there's just more and more of an issue, I think, around engagement by students, and what I'll be talking about later, after Gary's next couple of slides, will be kind of different things that we've had to do to respond to that as lecturers, in terms of trying to drive maybe more and more engagement outside of the class, and trying to get, I suppose, students back into to better habits, particularly in first year, where sorry, this had to. I might be going to the BBC. His kid just walked into the room. Sorry, but we're, in my first year class in particular, I see the biggest issues where they get into bad habits. So I have a very large class, a microeconomics class in the first semester of first year with over 600 students, where they've literally obviously come out of a secondary school environment with max maybe 30 students in a class, and then suddenly they're in a concert hall environment, huge auditorium, just a face in the crowd. And if you don't kind of tackle bad habits and try and get them to engage online and in the kind of maybe smaller group tutorials very, very quickly, I often see big issues set in, and that's often where we see the highest failure rates. And again, a little bit later, I'll talk about ways I've tried to adapt how I engage those students better, particularly in first year, and particularly identify the kind of at-risk cohort who are just finding that transition very, very difficult. So I'll hand back to Gary, but then I'll expand more on a lot of this later.
Perfect, thanks, Dónal. So yeah, I think Dónal spoke a lot there about ways to kind of tackle, ways to generate higher levels of engagement. And look, to be honest, technology does have a role, and it has a place in order to in making that happen. But something that gets in the way, I guess, is the perceptions of technology that are out there in terms of HE, and it comes from the way technology has evolved and the way it's been positioned by different service providers over the years, and sometimes it carries a little bit of a stigma. So when you say to an instructor that's been delivering a particular course the same way for 15-20 years, we've got this little piece of technology here that if you introduce it at a very kind of basic level, it can have a massive impact on, number one, the way you deliver your course, and number two, the experience the students are going to have on that course. So I'm going to tackle a few of the primary myths, I guess, that I hear on a day-to-day, and hopefully offer a little bit of kind of shape to how we package our solutions to make sure that the perception is correct and make sure that people have positive experience when they engage. So the first myth is tech is the approach, and this is a dangerous one in the sense of, if an instructor thinks that, if I let tech in, it's going to take over and technology is going to become everything that my course is about. It's never the case. Technology is always going to be a very small part of it, but it can be a very powerful component, especially with these kind of early undergraduate students. So the approach and the main benefits of tech is that it allows you to put a structure in place. It allows you to give students that little bit of structure that they crave, particularly when they're transitioning from second level to third level. It allows you to run assessments, for a large group of students and provide individualized one-to-one feedback, which is invaluable. And it's something that, again, students crave, students want that. And it allows you to push at least some of the responsibility back in the direction of the student. Tech takes months, years to embed. This is the one that is most prominent, I must say. And it's the fear of, oh, this looks great, but how long is it going to take me to do it? I can tell you right now that I'm working with instructors that are starting their courses on the 21st of September to get an online component of their course in place, where maybe 15 or 20% of the students' grade is going to come from a series of tracked interactive reading assignments plus 1 or 2 quizzes over the course of a 12-week semester. The initial dipping of the toe, or getting a kind of a handle on technology and utilizing it to achieve little gains in the beginning and massive gains into the semester, and particularly into year 2 of use, is great, and it's worth dipping the toe, particularly in the environment we're in at the moment, with, like I said, a few tracked readings, 1 or 2 kind of short algorithmic problem set type assignments throughout the semester. Minimal setup, can be done in 2 hours, can be done really well in 4. And then you'll have other instructors that want to go into the really kind of intricate details, and they'll take more time, but that's their responsibility. But just the minimum turnaround time to do this is actually very, very short window. So hopefully that kind of attends to that myth to some extent. In addition to that, I'm sure it's not just ourselves, but people are providing the assistance, the support to allow instructors to do this stuff quickly, and they're helping every step of the way, not only to get the instructor up and running with a piece of technology, but also to make sure that they have a positive experience with it. So when I'm engaging with an instructor these days, or any of my colleagues, we're talking about the solution. What's the best possible solution in this instance? We're talking about the course design, the layout, what makes the most sense for that particular subject area or discipline. We're talking about integration with the LMS. We're talking about positioning it with the students in a way that you're using language that is going to generate the best and highest possible levels of engagement. And we're talking about rolling it out, making sure that they have all the information they need, all the videos, all the PDFs, and our one-to-one support as well through first day of class presentations and things like that, just to make sure that everything works seamlessly for the instructor. I personally take a huge amount of responsibility for what that feedback is going to look like at the end of the year. So I've spoken to you, we've put a solution in place, but I want to make sure that you're coming back to me saying that it was one of the best things that you ever did from an educational perspective. So we take responsibility for a huge part of the process now, which allows us to take some of the workload off of the instructor during the initial stages. One of these, another myth of tech is that students want it and we have to give it to them. It's not always the case. Sometimes it's the case, and a lot of students do want to kind of work with screens and they do want to have mobile-friendly access to their materials. But what they actually want is they want a little bit of structure to help them to find their feet. They want to fall into a routine. They want to understand what that routine looks like. They want to get to application and contextualization of that kind of early theory quickly. If they see that connection and they see the relevance of that theory very, very early on, they're generally more engaged. And this applies to attendance as well. If the boring, monotonous stuff is being covered by an online system that students are engaging with on a week-by-week basis, it means that the instructor can dive in directly into the application, directly into the context, talk about case studies, talk about getting hands-on with different kind of projects and activities throughout the year. When the students see that connection and they see, right, I'm studying economics, this is what I'm going to be doing in that space in the future, and they see the relevance of everything that they're doing throughout the learning process, that's where high levels of engagement come from. And I think that's where tech can support. So this last one then, I don't use a McGraw-Hill textbook, so I can't use the technology. Again, I think this needs to be rethought, and I think it's happening now through this COVID period where people are thinking, right, well, I can choose a book that I like, or I can choose a solution that's actually going to have an impact on the way that I deliver my course. So I suppose we always need to think about the best solution versus the resource recommendation, the traditional approach of asking students to go and purchase a textbook, where we know generally the uptake levels are relatively low. Or we can talk about a solution that's put in position where we've thought out about what the student's perception is going to be, where we've thought out what the student's workload is going to be, and we have actual data and analytics to show us whether that activity is taking place or not. Obviously, the recommendation is always that there's a carrot there, some kind of incentivization, so that we can guarantee that work is done, and therefore we know that it's a part of the overall process. We know it's lending itself to the delivery of my webinars each week, and so on and so forth. But again, just back to that overall solution thinking versus, this is the book that I'm going to recommend. And again, I've touched on this student experience versus just thinking about the chapters that are sitting within the book, and time saved versus time spent. Conversations I'm having at the moment with instructors in certain disciplines are moving completely away from resources, and we're talking about simulations. We're talking about parts of resources. So it might be, a journal article kind of a assessment tool, or it might be a developmental psychology simulation, or it might be operations management simulations, marketing simulations, and instructors are building their entire course materials around that activity that goes throughout the semester. So these are some of the myths, or some of the kind of conversation topics that come up when we speak to instructors. And hopefully that helps to kind of make people a little bit more comfortable with the idea of just introducing tech to do a little bit of the heavy lifting. So I'll hand back to Dónal. He's going to talk a little bit about his own personal experience.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I mean, I'll really just talk about my own experience. I mean, say for the last 10 years, even before I did this, I started tracking back through my module outlines for the same introductory microeconomics module that I teach first years over the last 10 years. And if I went back in time 10 years ago, I mean, every single year, they're pre-COVID anyway, they were getting their 2 hours face-to-face lectures every week and a smaller group tutorial. Obviously, that wasn't changing, but what really changed was how, I suppose, I started integrating tech. So when I first started teaching the module, there's a recommended textbook. It's up to you whether you want to buy it or not. And if I talk to the campus bookshop, maybe 1 in 5 students were buying it. To then moving to a system where I'd say, okay, I'd make it a compulsory type purchase, but that would give them access to an e-learning platform. So I've used different ones over the years, from Cengage's MindTap platform, Sapling Plus, My Econ Lab, Connect. I've used a lot of the different e-learning platforms. But I suppose a few years ago, all I would have been doing is saying, you have to purchase that ebook. Maybe you hold some continuous online tests on that platform, and but more or less still just leaving it up to students in terms of going through your lecture content every week, having the tutorials, going back over that content with different problem sets, case studies, etc. And then telling students, obviously, there's a related chapter reading on that particular topic, directing them towards that, and then obviously they'll have online kind of continuous assessment type quizzes throughout the semester. And it was only, I suppose, a few years ago where I started looking at the activity stats properly and saying, well, hang on, how much are students actually engaging with this? They're spending however many euro on access to the system. Are they fully engaging with these types of things? And again, when I looked at the stats, the activity levels were actually very, very low. Most students were just logging in to do the online tests, not logging in to do any readings, and not really engaging with things. So in the last 3 years, I've started adapting by saying, I need to obviously better incentivize students to kind of work on this stuff outside of class, but also, I suppose, show them how that engagement matters. And for me, it was all around the structuring and sequencing of things. So it's no different now. They must purchase the textbook and access to the e-learning platform. But what I've started doing is, in a very sequential basis. So if I'm doing a particular topic, say demand and supply in lectures this week, they have an assigned tracked reading on that topic on their e-learning platform, which obviously I can see, have they completed that reading fully and answered the different questions or not on the topic. The following week, they have a small group tutorial with different case studies, problem sets based on all of that material, along with some other activities maybe on the e-learning platform. And then the following week again, they have a continuous kind of MCQ-based quiz or an assessment based on the topic done 2 weeks previously, where they get instant feedback. And in lectures, usually right after the exam, any questions that pose different issues for students, or the majority of students are getting it correct, I'd be given feedback immediately, refreshing that topic, and constantly the whole way through all of this, messaging the importance to students of, look, every single week you've a reading, every single week you've obviously a tutorial, and if you're continuously engaging with all of this properly, when you get to your continuous assessments, when you get to your end of term exam, you're going to perform better because you're going to be on top of that material. The other thing in terms of looking at the activity stats that I found was, there's always the bottom, whatever decile of students where you can see activity levels are low, or just performance is low, they're not really engaging. And before, I suppose, I would have looked at that stat and said, fine, not really done much about it, to be honest. Whereas now I have a system where I'll email those at-risk students and just reach out and say, look, if you're struggling with any of the material, we can put on extra support tutorials. I usually deliver those personally myself. Come talk to me in my office hours or whatever it might be. And again, continuously reinforcing that message in class, saying that, look, I care about how you're doing on the module, how you're engaging. I'm watching these stats all the time. I'm looking at your overall performance, and I'm reaching out to any student that is kind of maybe below average in terms of engagement or just not performing well, not to pick on them and say you're performing badly relative to your peers, but to say, is there something extra that you need? So if I look at that process over time, it really was a case of learning by doing, going from a very simple, I've added an ebook and there's a kind of e-learning platform, thinking my job is done in terms of integrating tech into my delivery, to actually trying to make that tech work for me. So Barry, if you can just go on to the next slide, just to give an idea of what students kind of maybe see. So that's for my upcoming semester for this large group, 600 plus students, introductory micro. Obviously in the background, they're getting lectures and tutorials to all of this, but on the platform, they'll have different assigned tracked readings, maybe different activities like an algorithmic graphing question or a discussion board assignment. Luckily, I have an army of teaching assistants, TAs that are there to help moderate those types of things. But again, it's students are actually, they have to interact and make a contribution around a particular topic. In that case, it's talking around correlation versus causation in kind of data analysis for economics. Different practice tests or whatever there might be, simulations that Gary mentioned earlier, based on the particular topic. The one way I saw that, before a few years ago, I would have assigned readings and students may or may not have done them. I now have pretty much made it, the vast majority of students do it, because I don't give marks for doing the readings, but what I do is there are 10 assigned readings in the semester, and those readings act as a weighting on their continuous online results. So if there was 40% going for different continuous online assessments and a student got 30 out of that 40% and did all of the readings and completed all of those tracked readings where I can see they've completed and answered all the questions, then they got 100% of that 30%. If they only did half the readings, they got 15% of it. It was halved. If they do no readings, they get nothing. And telling students that, look, that's not as a way to try and punish you. Those readings actually help you. They help prepare you for those continuous online tests. And looking at the stats, about 95% of students completed all of their assigned readings. There were a few that obviously didn't really engage, but that's often the case anyway. It's such a large group that there will be a cohort for whatever different reason might be going on in their lives. Even if you reach out to them, might not be fully engaging. That shows there. So that was my class last year for the same group, a kind of microeconomics introductory for the 600 plus students, where that online engagement indicator measures their, well, obviously their activity online, how long they're kind of online and participating in activities or readings, but also how they're performing in their quizzes and online tests. And effectively, it basically creates a scale and ranks them, I suppose, in terms of top being the most engaged, relatively speaking, to the bottom cohort of students who are there relatively less engaged. And for those in the orange and the red part of the pie chart there, particularly obviously the red, they'd be the ones who I'd be immediately emailing if I saw after 2 weeks from when the term starts that these guys are simply just not logging in or not engaging whatsoever. But even for the ones in orange there, again, it's simple enough to do a mail merge type thing where it still looks like it's a personal email. I obviously don't sit down and write to 150 students personally myself. You can do it quite easily with a mail merge. But again, it just shows that, look, there are office hours available. There are obviously TAs that have office hours available. Extra supports are available. just get in touch. I think it's more that they just know that you actually are tracking how things are going. And I always put up that at-risk kind of pie chart at the beginning of every single lecture. And if there's been a test, obviously show the results, the overall class results from that, and pick out some of the questions where maybe the majority of the class were getting the answer wrong. Often put up kind of maybe 5-minute videos on those particular topics as well online. Just again, showing students that, look, this has been tracked, and if I can see where you might be struggling, I'm immediately moving to tackle that. And I think based on feedback anyway, students definitely seem to appreciate it, particularly in such a large group where I obviously don't know any of their names. It's just a sea of faces in front of me, and it's one useful way of saying that, yeah, I am interacting as best as I can. I am engaging with you and trying to make sure that it's obviously it's a two-way street here, that students are engaging but seeing the benefits of that engagement. Obviously, I'm in economics, so there's a lot of data you can play around with too. But I also am curious as to see, well, has this approach in the last 2 years for me, where I've really moved to making sure the structure, sequence, the flow of everything is very well communicated, very well sequenced, and students get very quickly into good habits and then see the benefit of that. Well, obviously, I'd look at things like the correlation between, say, online engagement. So on the Connect platform that I'm using at the moment, there is an online engagement indicator where it's a scale from the most engaged student who's been the most active, has logged the most hours, performed the best, all the way down to the worst in terms of least engaged student, and compare that just to overall exam results on the module. And unsurprisingly, there's an upward sloping line, but I'd say unsurprisingly, and I'm not saying it's a causation here, it's purely better students are more engaged and might just perform better. So I would say that's too simplistic an analysis. So what I've done, based on last year's cohort, along with another colleague who teaches microeconomics to non-business students, and he has 400 students as well, and uses the same platform, we teach the same material, is we've started looking at more sophisticated analysis of that. So we have access to administrative data that gives us in Ireland, students sit a leaving certificate, maybe like the A levels in the UK, and the results that they get in that final exam at the end of their secondary school education generates a number of points. The higher the points, the better the performance. And we have that information on every student, so we have a measure of prior ability before they start. If someone's coming in on, say, a max 600 points and they get an A1 in my module, it's probably unsurprising in that they are a very high achieving student already. I also have information on how many students actually studied economics in secondary school. It's usually about 1 in 6, 1 in 7 students that have actually done it before, even though I'm kind of teaching an introductory economics module that assumes they haven't done it before. And obviously to expect those students to do better if they've seen a lot of the material before. And then we control for gender as well. So when we strip out and control for those effects, we actually still found very significant results showing that, say, completing assigned tracked readings, completing all of those tracked readings resulted in an overall 5% increase in their grade. So pretty much a letter grade, a B2 to a B1. But that the effect was strongest, we did a bit of distributional analysis too, the effect was strongest for those above the median. They're the ones that benefited more. Towards the bottom of the distribution, the students, let's say the lowest decile, those students still struggled and didn't really see much of an impact. So I wouldn't say we fully cracked how we tackle the most at-risk students and how we maybe get them more engaged. As I said, it's a first-year module. It's a very difficult transition because it's such a large program, the business studies program in the university, where it's very easy, particularly in the first semester, to get lost in the crowd. And it's not just a responsibility on my part. I think over all of the lectures and all of the different support mechanisms in the university, obviously have systems to try and better support first years. as they make that transition. So really, I suppose the key from all of this is, I mean, there's still other control variables I'd like to introduce, but my colleague and I were kind of surprised in that, not surprised, but, you know, controlling for a lot of different things that would be expected to impact on a student's performance in an exam. It really did show that, look, us sequencing, structuring, and incentivizing more engagement online, particularly, I'd say, with the tracked readings, definitely seemed to have, as best as we could tell, a significant impact on performance. And we started gathering data on previous years to try and do comparative analysis where maybe these tracked readings weren't used, or there wasn't the same kind of structure and sequence. And the main message I'd have just from me learning over time is it purely, as Gary said, it can be easy to integrate that tech. You can add in assigned readings very simply. It's a couple of clicks of a button. It's easy to generate an online test. That's stuff I would have done in the past. The key was how I set it up, structured it, and then communicated on a continuous basis to students on a rolling kind of weekly basis. Here's where we're at. Here's what you have to, here's what you have to do. Here are the benefits of doing all of this. And I'm also obviously observing all of this and staying on top of things. I think that was the big change for me in terms of taking advantage of the tech without getting lost in the tech, because I still obviously, pre-COVID anyway, would have had face-to-face contact with all of these students on a weekly basis. So I kind of hand back to Gary there.
Perfect. Thanks, Dónal. I'm conscious there of time, so I'm going to kind of move quickly through these last couple of bits. So to finish off, I'm just going to kind of give an overview of, I suppose, our presence, mcgrawhill's kind of engagement in Ireland over the last 3 years, and what's actually happened, because it's quite extraordinary, and it's because of the implementation of an approach that is working, not just for Dónal, but for many lecturers across the country. So in 2017, we had 1,100 Connect activations in Ireland, and by the end of January, February this academic year, we're likely to have more than 16,500 Connect activations, and that's with the data that we have at this moment in time. There could be further uptake over the next couple of months. So that's quite staggering in a 3-year period, but it's all come from Dónal and 2 or 3 other instructors who've had positive experiences, spoken to other instructors who have then adopted but similar approaches of embedding the technology as a small part of what they do, but an important part of what they do, because it sets up all the other activities on the course in a much more positive way. So that's 54 modules with more than 200 students on each module, with Connect being used as part of the structure of the course, in most cases incentivized or part of the grading structure, part of the CA marks. So the focus is very much shifting to delivery, away from having this allegiance to content. All of these instructors are thinking, right, well, what's the best thing for the students? What's the best thing in terms of saving me time, in terms of allowing me to deliver this course in the best way possible, which is impacting, as Dónal has shown, on engagement and performance. So effectively, in 3 years, we've gone from a very small percentage of students purchasing books in Ireland to a situation where we have entire cohorts engaged weekly with reading and practice, which has to be a positive thing. As Dónal said, it is having a major impact on the way his course is delivered. So I was going to get Dónal to kind of tell this story, but I think we only have a couple of seconds left, so I'm just going to touch on this very quickly. On a kind of a micro level, one university in particular, Dónal's university, initially started out working with financial accounting and economics, but this year we're looking at having probably between 5,500 and 6,000 students using Connect, with many of those modules coming from the business school. So like I said, it's not a piece of technology that's being used in the business school. It's a new approach that's being used to support the teaching and learning at the university. So to wrap it up, all I'm going to say is mcgrawhill is here to support across the board, whether it's a module that you want to give a facelift, it's a department that you need to future-proof, or it's an institution that you want to reintroduce as a global player from a teaching and learning perspective, we're here. And this is the space that we're operating in currently. So thanks very much for your time. Thanks, Dónal, and I hope you all enjoyed the session.
Thank you very much. Dónal and Gary, we can run over by a couple of minutes if you want to fancy taking on the questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. If there are any questions, happy to...
I'll give you to 12:53 if you can speak.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
So we've got a question from Sarah Bird. I can absolutely see the need to adapt students' needs, but graduates need to be self-driven, lifelong learners. So how do we bridge the gap from this highly directed, tracked and specific approaches to students being prepared for self-guided learning once in the workplace?
Yeah, I'll let Dónal take that one if you're okay with it, Dónal. Yeah.
I don't see the question. Sorry, where is the question again? Or could you just repeat it?
It was effectively basically this kind of directed learning when students enter into university, and how do we bridge the gap then between that, where they do have to take their own responsibility for learning after that point?
Yeah, I mean, what we do is just clearly communicate. I mean, I'm part. So we're an AACSB accredited school. We have all these assurance of learning type things. There's team teaching meetings, and we have a very common approach in first year across all modules in terms of setting student expectations and saying, look, we're assigning these readings, but obviously a lot of this is up to you. And this, maybe the tracked reading type thing that I do in my module, which is strict enough, obviously, it's more really to start, we hope anyway, setting good habits. I get them again, unfortunately, for those poor students, I get them again in second year again. So I really get to hammer them twice in terms of the structure, the sequence and everything. But based on feedback, students have said, yeah, some students that I've talked to, or just on formal feedback, have said that they then take some of that into other modules, which may not have the same structure or sequence, and say, well, yeah, that lecture's given me this reading or told me to do this, and it doesn't seem to be part of my grade, but I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So it got them into a good habit. Not everyone, obviously we can't track that type of thing, what they're doing offline, but the consistent approach, and as Gary alluded to, we're seeing more and more students. I think 8 of my colleagues that teach the first 3 semesters are now using a kind of Connect and the different assigned track readings. And that's just come about over us all talking about what works, what doesn't work, and learning from each other really in the business school, and seeing how that can then be applied consistently to help students develop better habits, to engage more. But critically, I see benefit to that engagement is the key thing. If they don't see the benefit and it's not structured properly, they probably won't engage.
Yep. Is there time for one more, Barney? Is there any other questions?
Sorry, I'm on mute. How has this approach morphed or evolved during COVID?
It's gone into overdrive. I mean, I think the biggest obstacle, I'm setting up the course in more or less the same way. I'll obviously be doing my track assigned readings, and there are newer kind of simulation type application-based activities and things that I'll be taking advantage of. The issue I think every lecturer is facing, for me, we're fully online for lectures, and that's going to be where we miss that really important face-to-face type thing. So I think it's even more important now that we're driving that engagement with the different resources and getting the sequencing right now. And a lot of my colleagues, we've had weekly meetings since July, and we've had ed tech people talking to us all the time. But the big focus for us will be delivering those online lectures where we can't get the same face-to-face. Not that there's much interaction with 600 students in a huge auditorium, but at least they're there and they're seeing you, and there's the whole we're all in it together type thing that students obviously see each other there. That'll be the big focus, and I think that's why bringing in the tech but not letting it take over will be important, on top of obviously trying to make sure that the delivery of lectures and tutorials works as best as we can in this online environment. So there's a big scramble there, but sure, it's the same for every university in most parts of the world.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gary and Donald, both very much indeed. Please, everyone, give their virtual thanks in the chat, and we'll see you at the next session. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Barney.
Cheers.